So today we're going to tackle a really huge global issue, chronic pain. When traditional medicine falls short, millions of people are turning to two pretty controversial alternatives, cannabis and kratom. Let's dig into why.
All right, so to really get our heads around this, we first have to understand the sheer scale of the problem we're actually talking about.
Okay, get this. More than 30% of adults worldwide are living with chronic pain. I mean, that is just a staggering statistic, right? This isn't some niche issue. We're talking about a massive global health crisis, and it's a leading cause of disability across the entire planet.
And for this huge population, the standard medical playbook, it just often isn't enough. As this research points out, current treatments leave millions of people without real relief. And that gap, that's what's driving this desperate search for alternatives. And it's also really important to get that our whole definition of chronic pain has changed. It's not just pain that sticks around. Since 2019, it's actually been classified as a disease in its own right. Now that is a critical shift because it acknowledges that this is a super complex condition with deep physical, emotional, and psychological roots. It's not just a side effect of something else.
So this search for relief, it's led a lot of people to a plant that's, been used for millennia, but is really only now being seriously studied by modern medicine.
So, the big question is, how does cannabis actually work to relieve pain? And spoiler alert, this isn't about magic. It's pure biology. It's about a system inside every single one of us that, honestly, most people have never even heard of.
The answer, it turns out, lies in something called the Endocannabinoid System, or the ECS for short. The best way to think of it is like your body's master regulator, kind of like an internal volume dial. It's this incredibly complex cell signaling system that plays a huge role in managing all these basic things, like pain, mood, memory, even inflammation.
So what's fascinating is that our bodies have these two totally separate, really powerful pain management systems. You've got the famous opioid system, right? The one that produces endorphins. But then you also have this endocannabinoid system, and they use completely different pathways. Cannabis works by tapping into that system, the ECS, activating this really powerful, natural way our bodies have to regulate pain.
Okay, so that's the theory. But what happens in the real world with real patients? Well, let's look at a key study from the Rothman Orthopedic Institute. They looked at a group of patients with chronic back pain who were already taking opioids, and they asked a pretty straightforward question. If these patients get access to medical cannabis, does it change how many opioids they use?
And the results? Well, they were pretty striking. This chart shows a really significant drop in the average daily opioid dose. They measure it in something called morphine milligram equivalents after patients started using medical cannabis. It went from about 15 units a day all the way down to 11. I mean, that's a really meaningful reduction. But here's the number that really blew me away. The most profound impact. Nearly 39% of the patients in the study were able to stop taking opioids completely. That is almost 4 out of every 10 people who just stopped their opioid prescriptions entirely.
Okay, so let's switch gears a bit and move to our next path. You'll see how this builds. We're going from a subject with a ton of growing research to something far more mysterious. We're kind of stepping off the map here into an unmapped frontier.
And yeah, that metaphor on the screen really says it all, doesn't it? If cannabis research is like a well-mapped city, kratom research is like a coastline just barely sketched on an ancient map. I mean, we have hundreds of preclinical studies on cannabinoids for pain. For kratom, the research landscape is, by comparison, it's almost a total blank.
And yet, look at this. Even with that huge lack of scientific research, user surveys show this overwhelming majority. We're talking as high as 91% in some cases are using kratom for one main reason: to self-treat pain.
So here's the crucial point, right? This incredible disconnect. You've got massive patient-reported use on one side, and on the other, a near total vacuum of scientific investigation. I mean, at the time this research came out, only 3 preclinical studies on kratom for chronic pain had ever been done. Just 3.
And all this scientific uncertainty, it naturally leads to a really confusing and inconsistent legal status. In the US, the FDA hasn't approved it for anything, and the DEA lists it as a drug of concern. But then you look globally, and the World Health Organization actually decided there wasn't enough evidence to recommend an international ban. So it's just stuck in this legal gray area.
So this all leads us to a really fascinating, very modern phenomenon. What happens when what people are doing,
their behavior, and their self-experimentation gets way, way ahead of the clinical research.
Okay, so we've looked at cannabis, right? It has this growing base of research. And then we've looked at kratom, which has almost none. On the surface, they seem to be in completely different worlds. But is there anything that connects the people who use them?
Well, here is the really surprising link that's been revealed by the data. The single strongest predictor of whether someone will use kratom is their prior use of cannabis or CBD. Turns out the two are just inextricably linked.
And the numbers here are just crystal clear. One study found that a staggering 96.4% of lifetime kratom users had also used cannabis. So the user bases don't just overlap. For a whole lot of people, they're basically one and the same.
So, what does this actually tell us? It suggests that people who are dealing with this awful, intractable pain, they aren't making an either-or choice. When conventional medicine fails them, they start creating their own treatment pathway. And often, they start with the more researched option, cannabis, before they move on to explore something like kratom.
And that really leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. In their desperate search for relief, our patients, through their own massive, uncoordinated, real-world trial and error, are they effectively creating a roadmap for pain management that science and medicine have simply not yet caught up to?